All right, so now we're going to look at some specific pests. All right, weeds. So just want to remind everyone that a weed is just a plant growing in a place that you don't want it. So it could be, you know, some people love dandelions and oxalis, some people hate them. A weed could also be, you know, a volunteer tomato plant that popped up in your strawberry patch because you used compost with tomato seeds in it. In my yard, I actually have calla lilies that act like weeds. Gorgeous flowers. I didn't plant them. They just pop up in the winter. They could be considered weeds. I'll keep them around. I don't mind them too much, but if they get out of hand, I gotta deal with it. So again, that's just perspective for you. It's just a plant that's growing in a place you don't want it. Some weeds can be very invasive though, and they can overwhelm native plants and cause problems for wildlife and humans. So we do want to be conscious of that. We don't want to let them completely overwhelm native populations. It's really important when you're dealing with weeds, especially really tough ones, that you do understand how they grow and when they grow. It'll be more helpful for you when you're trying to remove them. For example, I'm sure you all know that oxalis is a winter weed, and it grows by a little, like a seed, a bulb in the soil. So if you're pulling the oxalis out, that's like the clover, you're going to want to make sure to get as many of those little bulbs out of the soil as possible. Also, when they first pop up in the fall, which is a little late now, getting them when they're really small will be key. So that's just, again, understanding timing of your pest is really important for dealing with it. So some weeding solutions. Some cultural controls would be planting more plants. So the more plants that you want in the garden, the fewer plants, less room these plants, weeds that you don't want in your garden will have to grow. So again, more plants. They will also shade out the, more plants will shade out areas where weeds can germinate. If you have weeds in your lawn, I recommend trying to cut your lawn a little bit higher, leave it longer, and that will help shade out weed germination as well. Using mulch, that's a mechanical control when it comes to weeds, because it's really just a barrier between the soil, the seed germination. And so thick mulch, again, if you have a large area of weeds that you want to get rid of, that maybe you want to plant in, or you just don't want to look at the weeds, use that sheet mulching idea that I talked about earlier. 3 or 4 layers of cardboard all overlapping over the area, and then 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top. That's going to keep some really tough weeds down. I actually just did that in my yard last summer, and I'm happy to say that most of that area does not have any oxalis in it, which makes me very happy. Hand pulling using tools and weed whackers. I hate to say this because I know it's not what people want to hear, but hand pulling and using tools is actually the most efficient and effective way to deal with weeds. Unfortunately, I know that people want a better answer, but you really do have to put in that physical effort to get rid of them. Now, a lot of weeds you can just hand pull. Hand pulling them earlier once they first pop up when they're very young is the best, to let them not develop too much of a root system or go to seed, because certain weeds spread through seed, some spread through rhizome under the ground. Again, that's why we want to know what we're dealing with. That also affects how we pull them. And if there are some really pernicious, like perennial weeds that just have a deep root system and you can't dig them up or pull them up, you can just cut them down to the crown, so as close to the soil surface as possible. Cover that with mulch, and then really just monitor it to make sure no little suckers come up, and just prune those away immediately. That, unfortunately, is the best way to deal with weeds like that. And then a really simple way to get rid of weeds in cracks, instead of spraying it with a little pesticide, you could just boil some water. It has to be boiling water, it has to be over 200 degrees, and pour that into the cracks. That's a really very safe way to just get rid of those weeds. You don't really want to use it on a large area. It's just not efficient, and we don't want to kill all the life in the soil. So that's more for just cracks and edging. And then if you do want to try a pesticide, of course, there are some eco-friendlies out there, some made of clove oil and citric acid, ammonium nanoate, and there are a few other active ingredients out there that are less toxic to our waterways that you can consider. If you want to learn about those, there's a weeds fact sheet on our waterourworld.org that will list some more products that you could use.